The SCP Foundation is home to some of the most terrifying, inhumane, unspeakable monsters, creatures, things, whatever you want to call them. They also house less violent and dangerous beings, but one thing is for sure, if the SCP Foundation didn't do what they do, the world would simply be a very different place. Today's question on LBQ is, what if the SCP Foundation shut down? How's it going, guys? Welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions, the most inquisitive YouTube channel out there. I'm your host, Jared Bronstein, and today we'll be talking about the SCP Foundation in general, and what life would be like if they completely shut down. Now let me start this one by stating I can't say for sure what would happen. Because of this, I will break down a few scenarios or possibilities that I feel would most likely happen if the SCP did shut down. The reasoning for them shutting down could be due to the fact that the government no longer wanted to fund them, the employees striked and felt the job was too dangerous, they felt it was no longer safe to operate in general, who knows. Regardless, one thing is for sure, the SCP Foundation is shutting down, so now what? Well, the most logical thing the Foundation would do is try to kill all of their subjects. Given the fact that we don't know how to kill half of them, would be quite problematic and would certainly lead to a ton of Foundation members inevitably dying on the job. Now, there are definitely a ton of SCPs that would be killed, but as we know, there are certain things such as SCP-217, which is a virus, and SCP-3127, which is constantly evolving, that just cannot be contained. Because of this, if the Foundation did try to exterminate all of their cases, I think it would eventually lead to a majority of the Foundation's employees being killed, some of the SCPs being killed, and the rest of them simply running free and destroying the Earth, as well as each other. Which brings me to my next hypothesis. The Foundation shuts down, letting all of their SCPs go free. Not the most likely of the scenarios we'll be going through in this video, but still a possibility. As we know, certain SCPs are not supposed to come into contact with others. Not to say this would definitely happen, but odds are, if all the SCPs were set free, of the 5,000 plus that would be running rampant, you could bet your bottom a few of them would cross paths. Who knows what this could lead to? The end of humanity? World destruction? Would some of the SCPs team up with the human race in hopes of saving humanity? Who knows? One thing is for sure, a good majority of the SCPs being held by the Foundation are capable of wiping us all out. Meaning, if they were all set free, well, odds are at least one of the more destructive SCPs would be the reason the human race eventually ceases to exist. Now, I've saved the most realistic and least fun scenario for last. A group of Foundation members form their own SCP Foundation, knowing if the original shut down, humanity is inevitably doomed. Given that the employees of the Foundation spent the majority of their lives working for the SCP, I think the odds of them all just giving up and moving on to other things when things go south is highly unlikely. Aside from saving humanity and fearing for the lives of their family and friends, the SCP Foundation is also their livelihood. Although the Foundation employee protocol isn't necessarily clear, it appears those who work for the Foundation are usually kept from their family. With that being said, they still know they have a family, and even if they can't go home to their families, the employees would still be fearful and well aware that if specific SCPs were released, their family could be in danger. This is why I think former employees or higher ups would create their own SCP Foundation of sorts. It's even possible that they tell their families what they did for work and are currently doing, now that they're working for themselves technically. Unfortunately, although this is the most likely of the scenarios that would happen, it still doesn't seem like this would solve our problem. Even if past or present employees created their own SCP Foundation, they wouldn't have the money or resources to run their facilities the way the original SCP Foundation did. Because of this, it is possible that this group tries to contain only the most dangerous SCPs or focus on stopping the SCPs they know they're capable of containing. It's quite evident one way or another, if the SCP Foundation shut down, there's no possible way all the SCPs would be contained. Depending on which SCPs are released would determine how severe a situation them shutting down really is. I think we could all agree on one thing though, if any SCP were to be released, it's more likely than not that there are countless casualties. The military wouldn't be able to stop one SCP, let alone thousands. Again, it does depend which ones we're talking about here, but when I say the military can't stop one SCP, I'm obviously not talking about SCP-038, which is a tree that clones anything that touches its bark. No, I'm referring more to things such as SCP-513, which, upon hearing the bell ring, victims will start to see something stalking them until they're ultimately so physically and mentally exhausted, they usually just commit suicide. That SCP alone could take out an entire army, and it's a small little bell. So to wrap up, if the SCP Foundation shut down, I can't say for sure what would happen in regards to how things would play out, but what I can say is that we wouldn't know how to handle these SCPs, and it would ultimately lead to a lot of us dying. And because it seems the SCP Foundation isn't necessarily in one place, but rather have facilities all over the world, well, no one would really be able to keep themselves safe. It seems the SCP Foundation is vital in regards to keeping the world from being taken over by some of the most unspeakable things. Without their selflessness, hard work, and dedication, I'm not so sure you and I would be able to enjoy this video. What if SCP-3166 was real? Now, as you know, we've done tons of SCP videos, and as always, I recommend you drop us some comments below with other videos you'd like to see on our channel. So SCP-3166, what is it? Who is it a threat to, and how do we stop it? We're going to answer all that and more here for you on LBQ, so let's get to it. So I'm sure you all know who Garfield is, but for those of you that don't, well, first off, my condolences. Do yourself the favor and look him up. But in a quick summary, he's a grumpy cat who hates Mondays, loves lasagna and pizza, and doesn't seem to enjoy much other than eating. There are other characters such as his owner, John Arbuckle, and his pet dog, Odie, whom is usually the blunt of Garfield's antics. All in all, Garfield is a classic comic strip with harmless humor, and that is what SCP-3166 is based on. Garfield. But SCP-3166 is a more demonic version of Garfield. In relation with the creepypasta, we'll be calling SCP-3166 Gorefield. Upon further research on both creepypasta and of course the SCP Foundation website, Gorefield is quite a violent monster. Standing at approximately 2.1 meters in height or 6 foot 9 inches, Gorefield is known to be manifested when the Garfield media franchise is performing poorly. Gorefield is described to be, according to the SCP Foundation website, crudely made costume of the character Garfield, which field inspection has shown to be composed of legitimate cat fur. However, unlike Garfield or any cat, really, its entire innards is made up of lasagna. When Gorefield is manifested, it seems to appear within the vicinity of its target. These targets could be any of the following: rivaling media in regards to the Garfield franchise, those who used to be involved with the production of the Garfield comic strip, anyone who is involved with parodies of the Garfield franchise, critics of the Garfield franchise, and of course, Garfield's creator, Jim Davis. When Gorefield does reach its intended target, it will cause harm upon them with blunt force trauma, using nearby objects, and will force feed its victim lasagna, obtained from self-disembowelment. And for those of you that don't understand, well, Gorefield will kill its targets by hitting them using nearby objects, and by stuffing lasagna down their throats, which is obtained by cutting its own stomach open and taking its insides out. The only way to stop this from happening is by baiting Gorefield with frozen lasagna. Upon seeing the frozen treat, Gorefield will immediately take its focus off of attacking its original target, and will make its new goal consuming the lasagna. But following the consumption of said lasagna, Gorefield gets right back to its initial goal, terminating the original target. The manifestation of Gorefield initially happened on October 23, 1989, in the Chicago offices of United Media, where Garfield comics were published at the time. For the next week, Gorefield would manifest in different United Media offices across the country, ending on October 29, 1989. And that's all the information we know about this beast or monster, Gorefield, also known as SCP-3166. So what would life be like if Gorefield or SCP-3166 was indeed real? If you don't speak poorly about Garfield, are you then considered safe? Not quite. Unfortunately, Gorefield has no remorse whatsoever when it comes to the human race and those it attacks. It will kill anyone and anything that stands in its way and of the mission. Aside from this, if you're simply within its vicinity, it will attack you en route to finding its initial target. And being a demonic entity, it seems, as previously mentioned, there is no real capturing of this creature. It's manifested and demanifested. Even if it's caught and locked up, it can then disappear and reappear elsewhere. Of course, this leads to the very scary realization that no one is necessarily safe. If you talk poorly of Garfield, you could be at risk. If you used to work there, you're at risk. And if you currently work for Andrews McMeel Syndication, which was formerly Universal UClick, who now owns the rights to Garfield, you could also be at risk. Now you may be thinking, well, I don't know anyone who works there, I don't watch Garfield, nor do I care to talk poorly about it. Surely I wouldn't be a target. You see, it's not that simple. Say Gorefield's target is an employee of the new company that owns its rights. Say that said employee is out for dinner one night and you just so happen to be at the same restaurant. Well, you could very well be at the risk of being attacked by Gorefield. And unfortunately, it truly is as scary as that. Being at the wrong place at the wrong time. So if this evil entity really were a true threat to the world, well, there wouldn't be much that we could do. Of course, the notion of us all carrying around frozen lasagna as a form of self-defense would seem quite silly, but it may be our best bet. Imagine that, people all over the world carrying frozen lasagna in their pockets just in case the evil being that is Gorefield tries to attack them. That'd be the day. Of course, being curious is in our nature as humans, which means government officials may even try to deliberately summon this entity to see how to control it, how to combat it, and in general try to understand it. Of course, this would lead to the death of many. Some would have to summon Gorefield by speaking poorly in the name of the Garfield franchise. With no way of combating its powers, that said person would ultimately be a sacrifice. Who knows how many times this would be done and how much money would be spent on research trying to understand an entity we may very well never fully be capable of understanding. Aside from the necessary loss of life and millions of dollars spent, ultimately, we'd all be at risk of falling victim to Gorefield, also known as SCP-3166. Now thankfully, Gorefield is simply a figment of imagination. At least, I hope so, otherwise I'm not even safe.
This time it's a 3-for-1 deal. SCP-1913 is actually 3 separate entities, all with their own abilities, and all under containment by SCP. But what if these entities were not merely a part of the SCP mythos, but actually existed in real life? Let's explore. What if SCP-1913 was real? As always, let's start by getting everyone up to speed as to what these entities can do. As I said, SCP-1913 is actually 3 entities, conveniently referred to as SCP-1913 1, 2, and 3. All 3 have the ability to regenerate even from complete obliteration, although they do have an aversion to sulfur, but aside from that, they are all quite distinct. The first version of the entity, which goes by the name Agatha, resembles a white cat statue. However, as you can see, it's not your grandma's cat statue. It has inky black eyes, as well as the ability to release said ink on its victims. This ink can spread throughout a person's body, dissolving any parts it covers until nothing is left. What's even freakier about this thing is that detached body parts will continue to move of their own accord. That means if your arm was dissolved off, it would crawl along the floor trying to reunite itself with its body, and that sounds completely nightmarish. Thankfully, this only works with living tissue and requires direct contact with Agatha. Not only that, but it can be washed off with water, so it can do a lot of damage, but is pretty easy to remedy. Version 2, aka Telly, is a dark, female-looking skeleton, covered in hair and ash, with a head like a dog's. Telly is extremely fast, able to reach speeds up to 65 kilometers an hour. She is quite obedient when it comes to her fellow inmates, following the orders of 1913 1 and 3, and seems to have been taught to attack anyone wearing a lab coat or armor. The only way to avoid becoming the subject of her ire is to present her with food. And if you do, you'll find that she's surprisingly chill. However, if provoked, Telly will tear into her victim with slashing claws. Interestingly, or rather gruesomely, the victim will stay alive regardless of how much blood they've lost, until they take damage from another source, such as Agatha's ink. However, they would not feel good. Not good at all. The third version, SCP-1913-3, looks like a black lab, but instead of a nose, mouth, and eyes, it just has holes in its face through which white light shines. Its alternate name is Freddy, which is really weird because my childhood dog was named Freddy, except my Freddy was a miniature schnauzer and way cuter. Look at him. What a good boy. This Freddy, however, is very much not a good boy. When it catches its victim, it emits hot, gray flames from its face holes, burning his victim's skin until they are entirely consumed. If interrupted before the victim dies, they will still receive massive burns and may lose one or all of their senses. That all sounds pretty darn scary, but that's not the half of it. Part of what's so terrifying about these 3 is that they work as a team to kill their victims. Given their wide array of powers, they make a pretty terrifying threat to whomever they turn their sights on. Their general MO is to have Telly, the skeleton, attack and take down the victim, at which point the other 2 will come in and finish the job using their ink or fire abilities. But what would happen if these baddies actually existed? Well, as it stands, not too much, since they're currently all under lock and key, and under careful supervision by the SCP Foundation. However, if they were to escape, they could potentially cause a lot of problems. Let's start with SCP-1913-1, aka Agatha. If this ink cat was real, it could result in some wicked hysteria. Agatha's ability to dissolve people with her ink would be pretty terrifying once word got around. This would be made even more frightening if people didn't know where this was coming from. It could take a while before someone suspected the little porcelain cat. Things like rogue scientists and flesh-eating bacteria would seem much more likely. Although, maybe if people kept finding wriggling arms flopping around like a dead fish, they'd know something was amiss. On the bright side, the ink can only affect someone if they make direct contact with Agatha, and the ink only works on living tissue, so we probably wouldn't have to worry about an inky plague scouring the globe. Mostly just random, isolated murders. Yay! Next, how might SCP-1913-2, aka Telly, change the world? Well, for one, she would make the world hella scary. Once word got out that a freaky skeleton was going around slashing people, going out at night would be a lot less ideal. Sure, the odds of you being the one Telly ripped to threads would be low, especially if you avoid lab coats and armor. But who knows what you'd be ordered to do? Imagine how terrifying it would be if an evil person got their hands on her. To have the ability to maim and torture a person knowing that they will never die would be pretty ideal for a sadist like H.H. Holmes. But it wouldn't all be bad. Given how cooperative Telly seems to be, it's possible that, in the right hands, she could do a lot of good. If a person was properly anesthetized, this ability to never cause death could actually be a great way to ensure that someone never died on the operating table. Of course, it's unclear whether Telly would be super open to this, especially since her friends are significantly more bloodthirsty. But it's a possibility. Finally, how might the existence of SCP-1913-3, also known as Freddy, affect us? Well, similar to Telly, much of Freddy's damage would be psychological. As ferocious as Freddy is, there's only so much he can do, especially if he's concerned about getting caught. However, the idea of being burned to death by a phantom dog is enough to keep a good many people inside whenever possible. All this sounds pretty grim, but is there anything we could do to stop them? Well, there is, but it's not easy. Unfortunately, due to their regenerative abilities, we can't really kill these things for good. They don't seem to be invincible, but they tend to turn back up wherever they died after a bit of time. However, due to their aversion to sulfur, it would be possible to capture them, either by surrounding them with sulfur while they're alive, or killing them, then encasing them in sulfur. This would allow them to be safely transported back to the SCP Foundation, and the world could breathe easy once again. Well, except for, climate change and nuclear war and all that stuff. But hey, we wouldn't be murdered by a porcelain cat, so that's a win. And now we return to our question, what if SCP-1913 was real? Well, they'd certainly make the world a scarier place once word got out of their shenanigans, but thankfully they probably wouldn't do too much damage. Given their weakness to sulfur, there actually is a pretty good chance they'd be captured again if they escaped. The Foundation would just have to watch out for news of wriggling limbs, track the things down, surround them in sulfur, and boom daddy, they're back in captivity. They were caught once, they can be caught again.
Once again, we're talking about the SCP Foundation. More specifically, SCP-1861, a meteorological phenomenon characterized by heavy precipitation and fog, composed of saltwater, human blood, and human cerebrospinal fluid. Let's talk about SCP-1861 and how we'd handle its existence in the real world. As previously mentioned, SCP-1861 is simply a random rainfall. But unlike our normal rain, SCP-1861's rainfall consists of saltwater, human blood, and cerebrospinal fluid. Gross, and very specific. But we're not done here. The infected areas seem to be completely random and has no correlation to the area's regular weather patterns. The manifestation of SCP-1861 tends to happen every 3 to 6 months all around the world. The earliest record of its manifestation happened back in 1916. The amount of area affected by SCP-1861 also varies. However, to date, the largest affected area was approximately 5 square kilometers, which is equivalent to about 1,200 acres or just under 1,000 football fields. So entire towns or cities could possibly be affected, depending on their size, of course. While SCP-1861 does manifest however that may happen, it then summons SCP-1861-A. Think of it as a subdivision of SCP-1861. Now, SCP-1861-A is, according to the official website, a single underwater marine vessel that closely resembles B-class boats used by the British Royal Navy in World War I. Although SCP-1861-A will try to find a body of water large enough to support its entire frame, if for whatever reason that is not available, SCP-1861-A will appear in any collection of water with a surface area large enough to support its conning tower and topmost platform, even if it's only a few inches deep. And SCP-1861-A actually summons another subdivision of this SCP, SCP-1861-B. Yeah, this is a crazy one. SCP-1861-B is described as a humanoid entity that is dressed in a full deep-sea diving bodysuit. They're typically the size of an adult male and have the same strength and speed of one. Majority of them are capable of speech and competent enough to have full-on conversations. However, there is about 9% of them that have limited intelligence. SCP-1861-B will emerge from SCP-1861-A, and when they do step foot onto land, they will try to persuade any human they see to take shelter in SCP-1861-A. Those who refuse may be forcibly taken inside SCP-1861-A, but it depends on each individual case. Once a human enters SCP-1861-A, they will re-emerge as an SCP-1861-B whenever and wherever SCP-1861 manifests next. If SCP-1861-B is taken out of the area where SCP-1861 has manifested, SCP-1861-B will start to lose consciousness and become extremely fatigued until they return to an area where SCP-1861 has manifested. After the full manifestation of SCP-1861, any traces of SCP-1861-A or B will disappear, and all the blood, cerebrospinal fluid, and salt water left behind by SCP-1861 will instantly convert to regular rainwater. There were also documented interviews attached which had recorded conversations in text between humans, possibly SCP employees, and SCP-1861-Bs. The first interview is an SCP-1861-B trying to convince a person who's been dubbed D-186136 to follow him into SCP-1861-A. Upon questioning, it seems SCP-1861-B becomes tired of trying to convince the subject to join him to find safety, which is where the documentation ends. The next interview is between D-186145 and another SCP-1861-B, claiming to be D-186146, aka a man named Sal. The documentation explains D-186145 and D-186146, Sal, were told to go into an SCP-1861 manifestation, but D-186145 was told to avoid all SCP-1861-Bs, and D-186146, Sal, was told to go into SCP-1861-A. The conversation between D-186145 and SCP-1861-B, pretending to be Sal, explains what happened when he went into SCP-1861-A. It turns out everyone who goes into SCP-1861-A is told to put on the scuba suits. Then SCP-1861-A starts filling up with water, most likely because it's been submerged. When the doors to SCP-1861 opened up, it seemed like everything was normal, but underwater, almost like another dimension of sorts. None of them slept, ate, or drank anything for nearly 6 months. They just kept exploring this unknown world of theirs. Those who were turned into SCP-1861-Bs after entering SCP-1861-A were told not to take off their suits. Of course, some disobeyed and their bodies allegedly dissolved into the water, almost like a mist. This is what happened to our subject, named Sal, who, when he was speaking with D-186145, was told to take off his suit in the real world. At first, Sal seemed incredibly scared, but upon taking his helmet off, seawater started pouring out of the suit. There was no body, just a pair of eyes and teeth. Before disappearing, SCP-1861-B, pretending to be Sal, explained he saw dead bodies floating in the other dimension, or wherever SCP-1861-A took them, but the bodies were missing eyes and teeth. The bodies were of those who hadn't gone into SCP-1861-A, including D-186145, aka the subject that was told not to be in contact with any SCP-1861-Bs. Now I really hope I'm making sense here, guys, because this is a very long and confusing one. If none of that added up for you, put very simply, SCP-1861 is spontaneous weather that can affect any area randomly. Upon its manifestation, a submarine emerges in any body of water it can fit in, and this submarine is referred to as SCP-1861-A. SCP-1861-A contains humanoids, which appear to be people in scuba diver suits. These people try to convince more people on land more specifically, in the real world, to join them inside the submarine, and when they aren't being deployed to recruit more people to join them, they are taken to another world or dimension inside of SCP-1861-A. That world or dimension is all underwater, and everything is made of water or an apparent liquid of sorts. There's no food or water, they don't sleep, and anyone who takes their suit off, regardless of where they are, either in the real world or in the world of SCP-1861-A, will immediately dissipate. They will just completely disappear into a mist. So now that we understand, or at least somewhat understand, what SCP-1861 is, we can finally get into what would happen if it were real. There's no way of even being able to track it or understand when or where it would happen. Eventually, it seems SCP-1861 would take over the world. Now, of course, there are the people that would refuse to go into SCP-1861-A, but there's a very realistic possibility they are forced in. There's strength in numbers, and it wouldn't be before long that there are more SCP-1861-Bs than humans on Earth. The description of SCP-1861-B's suit is that it's anonymously durable and can only be removed by the person wearing it. This leads me to believe nothing would be able to penetrate the suit, meaning eventually the world would legitimately be dominated by SCP-1861. Unless the remaining survivors were able to possibly hide from SCP-1861, more specifically SCP-1861-Bs, by maybe living underground, it seems everyone would eventually end up inside of SCP-1861-A, inevitably turning them into SCP-1861-Bs. Under the impression that their suits protect them from all harm, such as gunshots, knives, really any weapon that could be used to penetrate, what would stop them from literally dragging you into SCP-1861-A? Now, the subjects themselves don't necessarily have superhuman strength, but if 2 or 3 tried to subdue you, I don't think it'd be much of a fight. Fortunately, SCP-1861 does not exist. We don't see rain made up of a mixture of seawater, blood, and cerebrospinal fluid falling from our skies. There are no humanoids in scuba suits convincing or forcefully taking innocent people into a submarine, and none of this is a threat to us. But if SCP-1861 were real, well, you now know what would happen. Hey guys, welcome to LBQ. I'm your host Jared Bronstein, and today we're talking about SCP-038. Now let's explore the idea of SCP-038 being a real-life entity. So what exactly is SCP-038? Well, in simple terms, it's a tree that has the ability to clone things. Yeah, sounds pretty crazy. But there seems to be much more to it than just that, as there usually is with these creatures. According to the SCP Foundation, SCP-038 was found on an abandoned farm, somewhere in the state of New York in the 1900s. At first observation, it was believed SCP-038 was an apple tree, and it certainly can be, but it can also create many other items. In fact, it's quite interesting how this tree works. It will clone anything that touches its bark fully within minutes. There is, however, a weight limit of approximately 200 pounds, which has been confirmed through previous tests. So far, SCP-038 has cloned the likes of fruits, including apples, oranges, watermelons, eggplants, as well as candy bars, snack foods, even televisions, toasters, laptops, keys, chairs, wine, DVDs, and CDs. Of course, with the knowledge that it can clone next to anything, to no surprise, we can confirm SCP-038 can also clone cats, dogs, and you guessed it, people. However, there is most certainly a catch here. Human and animal cloning is not recommended as it appears they age very quickly. The clones seem to have an average lifespan of just 2 weeks, and it seems they deteriorate from the inside out as they die. On top of this, it's believed each clone is weaker than its previous version. More specifically, SCP-038 was used to clone SCP-500. Upon cloning of the pill, it was determined to work only 30% of the time, with its effectiveness dropping over time clone. Another SCP that was cloned was SCP-173. Upon its cloning, the cloned SCP-173 stopped growing at the 200-pound threshold. This led to the clone to only have its head, right arm, and a partial upper torso. Although it was making violent gestures, they were happening at a much slower rate compared to that of the original. This leads me to believe that although SCP-038 can clone pretty much anything and everything, although capping the clone's weight at 200 pounds could still be quite deadly. Now, with all SCPs, SCP-038's location is unknown. All we do know is that it's somewhere in the state of New York, but there are still so many questions surrounding it. At first, cloning seems like a great idea, even if the clone lasts for 2 weeks. The tree itself is harmless, but I think it could be deadly because of airborne disease. Example being, if someone were carrying a virus or illness and they were to sneeze, could the bacteria in the air be cloned by SCP-038 if it were to touch this bark? I don't see why not. This would then mean it could sprout a mutant or clone of the airborne disease into the air. Although it wouldn't necessarily be as strong, it could possibly still infect some, and they could pass the infection on to someone else, which in a sense would be a clone of a clone. Do you see where I'm going with this? Now the positive is that it can clone things such as money, or whatever else we'd need a duplicate of. Car keys, as previously mentioned, but who is at liberty to use such a powerful object? Certainly not the general public. If SCP-038 were real, odds are the general public wouldn't even be informed. However, if they were, we'd have to trust those working at the SCP Foundation to use SCP-038 responsibly, something that's clearly been an issue before, with one of their workers, who's since been terminated, cloning a hangover pill. Aside from the fact that we would need to trust those with the power of SCP-038 to use it properly, we'd also have to take into consideration where it came from in the first place. Some abandoned farm in New York at some point in the 1900s is all that we can confirm from the SCP website, but that doesn't mean this was just a regular tree that somehow turned into this magic cloning machine. Obviously something was either done to its seed, or, while it was growing, that gave SCP-038 the ability to clone in the first place. Could it have been exposed to radiation? Or is it a mutant of another form of tree? We'd need to find answers as to who used to live at this farm and find out the history of the abandoned farm as well as the area in general. If this tree was in fact man-made, who knows what other beings or creatures could possibly be created by the person or people who are responsible for SCP-038. As previously mentioned, if the public knew about SCP-038, we'd also have to trust that it was used responsibly. The government could certainly manipulate the general public by cloning pretty much anyone and anything if they needed to. A great example would be cloning bodies of people whose disappearance have been a mystery. A more specific example could be Osama bin Laden. They say his body was dumped in the middle of the ocean, but some skeptics believe he's still being held captive and tortured. Others believe he was never caught at all. Unlike Saddam Hussein, whose hanging was publicly aired, Osama bin Laden's death has only been documented over text. There are reports there is video footage of the raid, as the SEALs who took him down had body cams, but some still don't believe the story. Some claim he had multiple bullets in him and the US government didn't want that image of him getting out, so they didn't and won't release it. Either way, the point I'm trying to make is that with the power of cloning, the government could clone a figure like Osama and release photos of the dead clone. We'd have no idea. Then they could secretly hold him captive, with only those involved in this case having knowledge of the truth. It may sound crazy or far-fetched, and I don't necessarily agree with the idea that because we didn't see photo or video evidence of his death, he's not dead, but I'm saying if SCP-038 was real, this scenario would be a possibility. Who knows what other corrupt things could come from the cloning tree? Would they be able to create another cloning tree by breaking off a piece of its bark and touching the original? Or possibly by planting the bark as a seed of sorts and trying to manufacture another version of SCP-038. These tests would cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, among all the research necessary to fully understand where SCP-038 came from in the first place, and how it was moved from the abandoned farm where it was found to Site 23 where it's currently being held. Unless Site 23 is the abandoned farm, and they just built around the tree itself. This seems like a much more realistic option, considering if the tree were to be moved, it would clone whatever was touching it in the first place. Also, removing its roots would kill it. Either way, documentation reads, I would like to remind all personnel that SCP-038 is not, I repeat, not a toy. It should not be used for cloning car keys, movies, music, or items from the vending machine. If this behavior continues, I will be forced to limit access to SCP-038. Now, due to the fact that there's been previous issues with cloning, who knows what would really be going on behind the closed doors. Obviously, a power like cloning would be too much for the average person to handle, and as problematic as it could be to have such powerful people have the capabilities of cloning so easily, it doesn't seem like it'll be much of a threat to us in our everyday lives, simply because the SCP does not exist. Like the rest, it's a fan-made theory or creature or object, in this case, and really does have no impact on how we should live our lives. But if it were to be a real thing, well, unfortunately, it seems like those with access would enjoy all of its benefits, and we'd have to hope they used its powers responsibly. Hey guys, welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm your host, Jared Bronstein, and today we'll be exploring the idea of SCP-3626, what it is, what it does, and how it would affect us if it were real. Before we jump into it, make sure to hit that subscribe button, click the bell to be notified of all upcoming SCP videos, and let us know in the comments below which SCP is your favorite. So according to the SCP Foundation's official website, SCP-3626 is simply chainmail, but it's not your typical if you read this email and don't forward it to 3 friends, your family will die chainmail. Oh no. SCP-3626 is apparently a chainmail that, like most, require you to send the story or mail to someone else, or else something horrible happens to you. In the case of SCP-3626, once you start reading, it demands that you do not stop or else. Now you're probably wondering what would happen if you stopped reading. Well, like any other chainmail, nothing. However, if you're reading about the SCP in the first place, you obviously have an interest in it, so you keep going. The document claims that when you start reading, you will be transported to another dimension and forced to finish reading the document. As you continue, you eventually come to learn that if you stop reading the document, you'll see horrible illusions, which are usually attached to past traumatic personal experiences. The document reads that once you do pass the note on to a colleague or friend, your memory of everything that happened will be erased. As you continue reading the document, you find pictures which are distorted. The document does make mention of the photos, saying if they are distorted to forward the message immediately. As you go on, you learn of other SCP Foundation employees who have read the message, and it ends with the option to forward it to another person. After you read that you won't be forwarding the message, there's some fear of what may happen, and then it says well done. Another file reads the cycle is broken at the bottom of the document, and upon opening that, you find out what SCP-3626 really is. A computer with Windows Vista OS. More specifically, according to the document, it bears branding of a non-existent Company Interplanar Delivery Services. A note engraved on the side of the object reads, property to the Ministry of Extraplanar Sociological Research. There's another website you can go to, which is blanked out by the SCP Foundation on the document. However, it claims if you click the link, you'll be transported to another dimension. Once someone else closes the website, you'll be returned to your original dimension. In this dimension, on the wall, there is apparently an inscription which reads, congratulations, your universe has completed the survey successfully. Your result is blank individual beings taking the test before the cycle was broken. Your universe's current rank is blank. Better luck next time. Research by Ministry of Extraplanar Sociological Research. Now, if you guys are like me, you may be confused by this whole thing. I certainly was, but upon reading it a handful of times and doing some further research on threads, such as Reddit and the SCP threads, it seems this SCP is one big troll. The idea is that if you don't forward the message to anyone, you'll have to deal with an unspeakable fate. Because of this, people continue to keep forwarding the message. Like any other type of chainmail, you must forward the message to continue the chain. However, to win, or break the chain, You must not forward it, and by doing so, you actually learn that it was all a test. The test was to see how many people would forward the message, and it seems the test was set up by a higher power. But we're not talking about some sort of godly figure, no. We're talking about beings from another dimension, and based on the ending of the document saying better luck next time, it seems we didn't rank very high. So what if this SCP was real? Well, in a sense, it is. Although this specific chainmail regarding the photos and all isn't necessarily real, we've all been sent chainmail, whether it's on Facebook, email, or text. You know the ones that say if you don't pass this on, the monster will appear under your bed while you sleep and eat you? Or if you don't send this on, the ghost of the person who died that night will haunt you forever. This SCP is no different. The only way to stop the effects of it from happening is to stop forwarding the chain. Simple as that. And in a sense, the SCP does actually exist. If you think about it, what am I talking about right now? The SCP chainmail that will only die when people stop passing it on. By having me explain and do a video on this SCP, I'm keeping it alive. It's quite meta, but also very interesting when you think about it. Unlike other SCPs, which are usually monstrous type creatures and appear to be dangerous and harmful to society, SCP-3626 doesn't seem to have any negative effects on the human race. If anything, it's just a simple test which was created by another species of higher intelligence, trying to understand the human race. So to wrap up, if SCP-3626 were real, nothing would happen. In fact, it is real, and that's how we can prove nothing will happen. The only thing that can happen is that the chain is continued by having it passed on from one person to another. And it seems I've done my part, so now it's your turn. If you guys enjoy the idea of this SCP and want to continue its chain, share this video with a friend. As long as we continue talking about SCP-3626, then technically it's going to continue thriving. If you'd like to experience SCP-3626 yourself, be sure to check out the SCP website. It's quite an interesting take on chainmail, and will certainly keep you intrigued due to the fact that it sprinkles in "don't stop reading this document" throughout. There's a sense of fear that comes with reading that, even though you already know you're going to read the entire document from the second you start.